Good morning. Welcome aboard Pride of Baltimore 2 with Captain With Show with Jeff Crosby, chief mate behind the camera. Jan Miles, hello, in front of the camera. Baltimore's just had a whole bunch of squalls go through overnight. It's been raining. Now the temperature is a little bit down. Humidity's still a little bit high. And we're going to get more later this afternoon. So it's been a little tempestuous around here.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. Hope you guys are doing really well. Before we get started, we're changing the format of the Coffee with Captain a little bit. So instead of just being open to questions, we're going to be a little bit more focused in the content that we are putting out. So this morning we're going to be having a conversation about voyage planning. But before we get into that, Captain Miles, can you just explain what the crew are up to right now and what the status of the boat is?
Sure. A decision was made by the board of directors a while ago that the loss of a direct use of the vessel income, which is roughly 10, sometimes 15% of the overall company between guest crew sales and performing day sales with crowds of people on board, were being canceled for safety, protection of everybody, the crew and the public, for transmission of the disease. So we've been in shutdown mode. We've been laying the boat up. So right now we're in the phase, you're in the phase of the crew of putting the frame together that will then get a cover over it so the ship is protected from the sun as well as the rain. And there's a lot of consideration, since we've had to do this once before. Mm-hmm. Instead of it being a whole global pandemic, it was a very, very local financial problems. We learned from the layup of 2018 that we were getting behind on some of the care of the vessel. So two things: super increase of ventilation down below, forcing it like mad to deal with a localized, what we noticed was a localized mildew situation. So there's always fear that it could be a lot that's all cleaned up and has been, but we never saw that during the winter. Shorter period of time, different temperature, different humidity factors. But for the long periods of time with the ship being open, even though the cover is really quite open as well, not forcing the air around is turned out to have a little bit of a consequence. So being aggressive there, and then the company's keeping active you and me to take care of the vessel over the period of the rest of the year. You with your carpenter skills, among just a few of those skills, will be vital to actually moving ahead, accounting for the fact that the boat's 30 years old, 32 years old, and counting, and getting ready for a full-on season next year in 2021. So it's also the single greatest asset of the company. So keeping that up is important. And then planning. I'm involved in planning, a lot of planning. It's not so much what the boat does, it's getting it to where it's going to do it. Now, I act as a spokesperson, all the crew do. You do as well in terms of the mission, but getting the boat from A to B with a commitment to actually trying to do it as much under sail as a sailing vessel as is feasible in a modern mission context. She has auxiliary power, so we can combine that. We can combine the power of the sailing vessel, recognizing the nature of the sailing vessel on the one hand, and we can depend on the engines on the other hand to sort of cover certain other things. So generally speaking, this vessel has voyaged at a up and down rate of between sailing 100% of the time, sailing for 60 to 80% of the time, or when you average out all the different voyages. The longer ocean voyages, it tends to be a much higher percentage of sailing. Although there have been some exceptions when it comes to the really, really short legs. Sometimes they can go from darn near door-to-door under sail, and sometimes it's nope, it's not
Yeah,
never going to
nothing-
happen.
Nothing at all.
It's
yeah.
only 100 miles, so we got to
everything
get
in
there.
between.
Yeah. So my role has been for decades now, and all the captains that have been around have been looking at answering the question: can we be there, and when can we be there, and how long does it take? That's a big deal.
Yeah, so for those of you just joining us, good morning and welcome aboard. We have Captain Jan Miles and front of the camera, Chief Mate Jeff Crosby behind the camera. And this morning's conversation is about voyage planning. So what does it take? What goes into getting Pride from point A to point B from a voyage planning perspective?
Well, it starts with the company imagining the mission. And over the decades, some of those missions have been pretty grand. And the grandest one has been the Asia trip in 1998. That conversation started back in 1994, 93. And it comes to me as the most long-lived captain with the project. So far, so good, right? So I started looking around, and having voyage planned a lot of other trips, cross to Europe and a variety of shorter ones, the time of the year question comes up. So you might do something like take a superficial look back in those days to what were the common routes, so and what was the common weather, and where do they derive from. So a publication might be this British publication. It's really, I think it's been out of print. It might be under reprint in the last 20 years. This is one of the out of print versions. It covers descriptions. This description is the ocean currents. Oops, sorry. And so with ocean currents, you can start to pick a path. But there's also going to be routing information in here. They'll put, this is the case of the North Atlantic. This is some of the routes for various ports, the distances, and there's descriptions, pretty basic descriptions. Now, since this, someone else has come along, and that is this publication. And this is the second edition. There's probably a third. And Jimmy Cornell, he went into the fact that a lot of cruising is going on. And here's an example of routes in the eastern Pacific that someone might choose. And there's coding, and you can find the coding through the process of an index for an area, but then it's described in a little bit more descriptive language, and you can start to imagine what's going to happen. Now there's also the question of weather, and if you're looking for the long history of weather, there's a thing called the pilot chart. And this is a fascinating publication when you want to settle down and examine it, because there's a lot of detail there. The roses represent wind. The center of the roses represent percentage of calm. The length of the arrows represent direction and how much percentage of that direction. Then there's also other references, such as the amount of storm that could occur. I mean, let me blow up the rose.
It's not showing up.
Not showing up. Oh, that's got to reboot it. All right, pardon me. So
technology.
Yeah. When you're at home, you've got lots of time. That's why sometimes hard copy on a boat becomes of value But then there's weight and space.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Oh, no, it didn't. It won't blow up. So,
just to kind of touch on that for a hot second, how much today do we rely more on electronic voyage planning and equipment versus back, let's say, 20 years ago?
I would say that transition has been ongoing, and it's limited to how much adaptation on the basis of okay. If you need to have a reference, you can download it and keep it on your hard drive or on your storage device. So this is the type of thing you would put. You can download this from the internet and you could put it in. Now the difficulty, or rather the limits of a pilot chart is it's an accumulative average. So this is 110 or 15 years it's been going on.
Sure.
So we're seeing a lot of change in patterns, and so you might want to look more recently, in which case when you want to go more recently, there's another website that's really sort of fascinating, and that is this Earth.nullschool website, which records all the American GRIB information. But to go to your question about digital, there's so much bandwidth occurring now for satellite that it becomes less and less necessary. It costs, but some of that cost is actually quite limited now, and it's affordable by quite a few enterprises, such as just the GRIB itself is you can put an area that's just 300 miles around you.
Sure.
And you can pipe that in via pretty narrow bandwidth satellites such as Iridium, and that's a small package of information, and then you can apply that. If you, when it comes to weather, ocean region weather maps, there are these weather facsimile maps. You can get them by radio, but you can also get them by download through very narrow band satellite, or radio for that matter, single sideband. If you know how to address an email properly for content, and it'll just come back. It's called an FTP file server system. And each one of these maps is one particular designation. This is a package you can view before you go away, and you can see a number of days. It's generally 96 hours.
So what kind of information is on these maps?
Yeah, each one is different for sure. So the jet stream for the North Atlantic is this one. And this one, I think, is a lot more important than people give it credit for when they're just sort of wondering what's going on the surface. This is a higher altitude map, and it depicts that stream that runs through the atmosphere called the jet stream. It's like a river of wind. It's much faster than what happens elsewhere. That dark line is a representation of of a specific altitude that represents a common difference between the chance of force 8 gales are greater versus the chance of force 8 gales and less.
Sure, it's a dividing line,
yeah,
so to speak.
And it's a statistical thing that's been discovered. So the Americans, when they print that map, they actually print a dark line representing that south of that particular line, the chances of a stronger than force 8 gale is quite a bit less than if you're north. So as you get closer and closer to your voyage plan, you're going to want to look at this, because we've had the experience of sending Pride, the first Pride and then the second Pride, over to Europe a total of 6 different times. I've done all of the eastbound voyages. So I've done each one of those eastbound trips. 4 of them have been in the same month of the year, basically April. And each time that jet stream, based on its location, has driven the course down around through the Atlantic, like Bermuda, Azores kind of track, which is a lot of miles.
Yeah.
When you're headed to Ireland from Chesapeake Bay.
That's a pretty far south to get north.
And one time it was come out of the Chesapeake Bay and go northeast, but then get blown further toward the north. And by the time this situation, air pattern, change, it was a high pressure over Bermuda. So that's clockwise. So to get a fair breeze, you need to go with the wind. So you go north. We were all the way up to near St. John's, Newfoundland, before we could go east.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1996, that was in 1990 when we first went across with this vessel. In 1996, we're trying to go to Ireland. It's blowing northeast on the surface, right there at the mouth of the bay. The jet stream was across the Hatteras area, going east. So I knew we were going to have to go south, and so another vessel headed to Europe, coming out of Boston. They actually went all the way down towards the Azores before they could go back up towards Europe, because they were trying to escape all that weather that was to the north, which was actually very contrary. It had the strength of the wind was great. So anyhow, the jet stream, as you get closer to your departure time, say 5 to 7 days out, you start looking at the patterns, because no matter what the big plan is, you're going to need to adjust for the actual goings-ons. So and then when it comes to some of the voyage planning that can go on these days, electronic charting. This will be a trick, huh? Electronic charting gives a chance to do some imagining. So in this particular chart, this is time 0. There is a planning phase whereby you can do some imagining. So I'm going to create an ocean route, and I'm just going to say we're going to go out towards Bermuda, and it's going to run a model that is the vessel performance data on Pride of Baltimore, which we've custom developed into here. It didn't come with the program. We had to make adjustments. And then you can zoom in on this to study it. So it'll tell you a variety of bits. The colors are related to a scheme representing the kind of sailing. It's going to be reaching, moderate, reaching, strong, upwind, strong, upwind, moderate. And you can so this going back to the zoom out, this is,
so you have those little arrows sticking off the bottom of the line. What are those representing?
That's a waypoint dot with a representation of the strength of the wind that the GRIB is suggesting, because it's all based on a recently downloaded data description of the surface wind.
Okay.
Among other things.
So that line pointing down
is actually
so the wind is coming from that direction,
right?
Correct?
And there are feathers. If you can see this, there's a feather and a half, a full feather and a half a feather. Yeah. That's meaning 15 knots. Then there's a breakdown. If you can see here a lot of data. Boy, this software program is really it takes a long time to get into the weeds on it, but it'll show at that point, among several things, what the apparent wind angle is likely to be, what the apparent wind speed, what the true wind direction is forecast to be, and what the true wind angle is supposed to be forecast. So, and also the strength. And so so there's a lot of planning and imagining. So we're getting ready to virtually sail the Annapolis to Bermuda race.
Yeah.
That was originally scheduled to start today at 5 o'clock. The whole thing's been canceled until the next 2 years because of the pandemic. We're going to virtually sail this. So right now, so close to the start point, I'm looking at the current weather and imagining short range. This only goes out 4 or 5 days, or maybe 7 if I want to look that far ahead. And so there are limits to that. So when it comes to Pride, doing large voyage planning, like going to Asia, that took a number of months of me making sure I understood what we're getting into. And I learned, but I'd also heard, and I verified, that typhoon season is not to be fooled around with. So it turns out that in our Atlantic, we have a pretty wide gap that we consider not hurricane threat. Over there, that gap is much more hard to identify, but generally speaking is in spring of months, so our northern hemisphere spring months. So I was able to conjure up a route that was to go to all the places we were thinking we wanted to go to. And keep in mind that instead of going around the world and just go, it is, we need you back, because the public relations story is tangled up with out of sight, out of mind challenges. So can you be back in a year? And I knew this from previous experience with the old Pride of Baltimore, that being away a really long time causes some great mischief when it comes to engagement by people here locally in Maryland and Baltimore.
Sure.
So I've been kidded with the fact that, hey, you went all halfway around, why didn't you go all the way around? Well, we couldn't get around in less than a year.
Yeah.
We were able to, just less than 365 days, we were able to leave in mid-December and come back by Thanksgiving time. So that's down to the Panama, across to Hawaii, across to northern China directly, being Shanghai, and then south, taking the weather pattern that is the tail end of their winter pattern, which is northerly monsoon as they call it, go south through the coast up all that part of China, then come out and then go offshore through Taiwan and back in towards South Korea and then over to Japan during that transition of the northern monsoon to the southern monsoon, and then in the middle of the summer cross over to the the northern Pacific, over to the Pacific Northwest. And so I was able to lay out an itinerary as early as 1993 when I got asked that question. It turned into a fiscal decision to delay, so we didn't do it until 1998. But that same model, that same information was still valid. And when it comes to the business of dependability, we had a big scare on the cross to Shanghai. We were scheduled to hit China for the first stop of the Asia trip on 1st of April. But we come out of Hawaii in 1998, and it's a very significant El Nino year, which means the trades are the winds in the middle, near the equator are very slow. And it's a very warm, so we come out of Hawaii with the traditional instruction set, drop down from 20 degrees latitude north, which is where Hawaii is, 2021, drop down to near 15, and then you're supposed to glide across the Pacific. Well, we were hunting and hunting and hunting for winds greater than 10 knots, all the way down to darn near 12 north. Finally, using up fuel in a combination of motor sailing and jibing, we had fair winds. It's just that it was stunsail up on one side, along with the topgallant, and then do the jibe. So stand the stunsail, sheet all that stuff in, jibe the main around, brace around, and then set the stunsail again. And it was like morning and evening. We would do it just after sunrise, and we would do it just as sunset, because there was this quality of 5 or 10 degrees of shift of angle based on the sun rising and passing overhead versus it being dark. It was kind of strange. And we were making 4 knots, 3 knots, 4 knots, 5 knots periodically of motoring, running out of fuel, running out of calendar, wondering if the Chinese understood April Fools. So we wound up diverting to Guam and did a 10-hour stop. And because we notified the office that we needed to do this, and would they look ahead and sort of set things up so we could get fuel, keep going. So we wound up with some breeze, roared in. The El Nino effect has these the whole of the trades have these pulses of weather, and they can be very, very wide pulses and last for days. In this case, we had gone from a near calm to a nice steady 15 to 20 knots. So we roared into Guam, did our fuel laundry, picked up the mail that was forwarded, and bought some ice cream, and then ran out again, did a roar across the rest of the Pacific towards the islands like Okinawa, and passed in, and then the East China Sea was calm, wet, ugly, and we used up a fair amount of fuel going into Shanghai, but we were on time.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
that's important.
Yeah, we've been late, but it's late very, very locally. Mostly very dramatic weather pattern. I'd say in the 40 years of the two boats sailing, we've been late maybe as many as 10 to 12 times over the 40 years. Mm-hmm. But it's weather-related lateness. We've had some scares, but no. It's been so. The planning business is, you got to look at what the experience is. So some of the earliest recordings, this publication goes back, like, in terms of its base, the great explorers. Mm-hmm. They would record what was going on, and then with the increase of passage making, the recordings of each of the vessels would go back to these it would be consolidated into these general instructions. And today, I think one of the most efficient ones for imagining where you want to cruise and when you might go is this book by Jimmy Cornell. Mm-hmm. But then you got to have the discipline of recognizing that as much as you're imagining this, you'll want to always adjust the plan as you get close to departure and as you're executing. Don't think don't make the mistake of being stuck on, we got to do this. No.
Yeah. So you've done the work to set forth kind of a plan, and you kind of have a good idea of what potential weather is going to be. How do you adjust that when you're underway and actually sailing? So
the weather facts that I showed you is one of our primary ways. We get it by paper.
It actually comes in on this box up here.
However, sometimes atmospheric interruption of signal makes the image very fuzzy or doesn't even come through. Mm-hmm. So we can go to our satellite and we can do the FTP file server thing, and we can select a specific map and order several of them, but we can choose a specific map. So this is a specific map, comes out 4 times a day by the Americans, covers all of the North Atlantic. There's another one that covers the Pacific. And then you can get into more detailed stuff. And so I can select charts and get them, and I'll make decisions based on this sort of thing.
So can you get a little bit more in depth in there? Like the map you're on right there, what is that showing? How is that representing the information?
So this one is called the wind and wave forecast. Mm-hmm. So the wind and wave forecast also produces every 4 times a day, every 6 hours. You'll see these arrows and you'll see these lines. So the wind is, in this case, it's a 24-hour forecast of the surface wind by the arrows, with the feathers indicating strength, and then the solid lines are representing the height of sea in feet. So this is a 6-foot curve, and in here is a 7 to 8 foot section. Based on stronger winds, you can maybe pick up that there's 20s pretty steady here, but there's more like 15s around it, and then it gets even softer 10s. And
then if you scroll down to the one below it, what is that representing?
So that's now this is, in the case of this package, it can get a little confusing because this is what you'll get all at once if you go to the internet and you choose it. What I would say is that some maps I don't want. In this case, this is This is, so I'm selective. So this
Sure.
is a Jetstream map. It's a 36-hour forecast. It has its value, but sometimes you don't need it quite that frequently. So
Yeah.
if I'm getting a Jetstream twice a day, if I choose to get one and I go hunting for it via the FTP file because it's not coming through nice and clear, that's a cost factor because it's airtime. Not a lot, it's basically 2 or 3 minutes of time. Then I'll be selective. In this case, this is a jet. It's a 36-hour forecast. The dark line is there. My interest regarding the race is we're down here in going to Bermuda from the Chesapeake Bay. It's a relatively benign scenario, so
Yeah.
the chances of a really strong low. But as I go through, this is a 5-day outlook accumulated in a pattern. This is another jet stream, which is a 48-hour. Then we go to the 48-hour surface depiction. This is just high pressure, low pressure depictions. And then we get to the wind wave for 48 hours, and that shows that things have developed a little bit. There's a little bit stronger to the northeast. It's still relatively benign down here. So there's a variety of maps that you need to get familiar with, understand how they relate to each other.
Yeah. So this style is more slices of information that are presented in more of a 2D format.
Right.
Can you pull up a weather grid and show the difference between that type of weather analysis and this type?
Okay, so yes. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't prepared for that question. So let's see.
Gotta keep you on your toes.
So, okay, there's an app on the iPad that you can run pretty clearly through the Iridium system.
Yeah.
And that is this Predict Wind app. And Predict Wind allows you to select. So this is a colorized, and and it gives you a choice of different models. In this case, the more common used one here with the this side of the Atlantic is the GFS, the American model.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can advance it. I don't know, maybe it works better this way. Yeah, so you can start to watch it live. It's sort of not live, but you could put it in motion, see how it goes.
So this is instead of having slices of information, this is a lot more interactive.
Well, if you're familiar with the website Windy,
Mm-hmm.
this is like a Windy experience.
Except a much broader.
Right, yeah. And so, and there's some controls within the app to narrow down so you don't need information this far west, or rather east, so you could localize it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that. But then when you want to play around with your chart, what you're doing is through the electronic chart, through the app, you're pulling a system through the satellite, and you're selecting a zone, and you're asking for it to come, all this information to come either through email, and then you plug it in, or live.
So that's showing weather grid information that's overlaid on our navigation.
No,
software.
this is more like an index. You
Okay.
put out a search area.
Yep.
You say, I want this area GRIB.
Yeah.
Then you send a message, which is going to be all this data. When the message goes out, eventually there's a download that occurs down here. Now, that's with the live system. You're alive on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing it out at sea, you're sending an email.
Yeah.
And so there's an option in here with which it'll help you configure that email. That goes out, it comes back, and then you take the package information and you insert it into the application, and then you go back to this planning phase. So each of the electronic packages made by different groups, they're handling things, and it's sort of like working between a Mac system or a iOS system or or a PC system, Microsoft, you have to start to understand some of the subtleties and get practiced with them so that you're not spending a lot of money or you're not missing getting what you want to get when you're offshore. And in terms of references, one of the references you're going to go somewhere. What do you know about somewhere?
Yeah.
You better be prepared to get the sailing directions and the planning guide. The Americans, now this is outside cruising.
Right.
This is more commercial, and I'm saying you don't have to do the commercial, but it helps in case of Pride because we're going to commercial ports and there's piloting involved that might be required, pilotage, that might be required. So a sailing direction en route, this is a government pub. This will have details that are coastal, very, very detailed with some drawings that can occur. I've managed to figure out a place to go hide at anchor in China that had very little information, but it was a very successful anchorage in a tiny little seafood farming area. They were quite concerned that we were polluting their waters. It was hard to figure out in the language. They had no English, we had no Chinese, but we managed to work our way through it. Then this is the planning guide.
Yeah.
And it'll have in the back a lot of month by month information. It can, at first glance, it can really make your eyes go up into your head. But if you spend time with it, you can gather reasons why some of these routes that Jimmy Cornell comes up with are defined the way they are.
Sure, yeah.
So this helps synthesize all this information. So this is not so important, but this kind of thing is, if you're doing the commercial port. Now, cruising guides, there's a lot of, but it's hard to go to one place and find the right cruising guide. You can at least get this. And the Americans do it for the whole planet. It's a need. In different publications, you do the British version of it. They're all over. You can go pick up. I want to do Pitcairn Island. There'll be a big description of Pitcairn Island. There's really no harbor there, but
that's right. You can go. It's described. Cool. We have some questions that have come up. One coming from Greg Bauer. Is Time Zero the main tool we'll use for the virtual voyage?
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit how that's going to work?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to emulate what it's like to be away from being connected. Mm-hmm. So today and tonight and early tomorrow, because we're in the Chesapeake Bay, the start is at 5 p.m. today, local time, Eastern Daylight Time. So I'll be eventually sending out a log that will describe what the start was like, and then what the strategy has been to get down the bay with the existing weather. And I might do a snapshot of the screen to show what I think the pattern is going to be strategically to just sail the boat down the bay. Yeah. It has nothing to do with any other boats, not just because it's a virtual cruise, but because I'm busy trying to just get the boat down the bay. Yeah. And then in the morning, sometime late tomorrow, will be another log that I'll create. When it'll get posted, I'm uncertain. But that will describe how did it work out the last 12 hours. Mm-hmm. And then look again going forward. Again, I'm looking in terms of backwards, might be one snapshot as well, but plan didn't work out quite that way, or it did. Mm-hmm. And then go looking forward again. As we go offshore, then I'll convert to this business, which is take a grib while we're still in, it's easy to take through cellular, take a grib, get it downloaded, and then model the ship's polar, and then I'll probably initially follow that. Or I might disagree with it. See, one of the things that this doesn't recognize right away is choosing to divert course vis-a-vis the jet stream and having eddies. And some of the eddies are clockwise, some of the eddies are counterclockwise, so you want to be careful about which one you hit on which hemisphere of that eddy. So you're talking about a clockwise eddy, you want to hit the southern hemisphere of that eddy so you get a boost. Mm-hmm. because of the clockwise nature of that kind of eddy, but another eddy could be counterclockwise, in which case you'll want to be on the northern hemisphere of it. So there'll be some different research, and because the jet stream, the Gulf Stream doesn't change so quickly, I can get that and store it and just have it as a reference.
Sure.
And then make decisions of routing. So I might have to change this sort of direct from the bay to Bermuda model, and I'll say, okay, now I'm going to put in a bend.
Right.
Or make two different legs and model that out to take advantage. And so then later on, as we're offshore and out of range, what I'll be doing is taking each of the WeatherFax maps, loading them separately by email, reviewing them. There's a text access. There's ocean region text weather forecasting, and I can also get that through weather facsimile. The same machine that you just pointed out earlier does two things. It can take in WeatherFax maps, but it can also take Navtex information. Navtex is a coded thing that talks about digital written information, and it can involve a lot of things, but largely you can get ocean region information, whether not coastal necessarily, but sometimes, but ocean. So you can get information that way. We also have a marine satellite system called Inmarsat-C, which is sort of a commercial marine bulletin system, and we'll get ocean region text data that way. And I'll compare the GRIBs with the update GRIB information, the update WeatherFax information, with the written information, and of course I'm looking up.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling, and I'm looking at the horizon. So I'll be again twice a day producing a log that will go to the office. The office will figure out how to get it into the various means of getting it out to the readers, and then the readers will see what's been happening according to my interpretation of the existing weather for the day and what the Pride would do with it.
Sure.
And so I'll be using this to model both what we think we're going to do with the boat because of the GRIB weather updates, but also I might deviate from it because I have some other reasons to want to deviate from it. Could be weather related. Could be that this is an experiment. Our GRIB information, by the way, comes courtesy of a handicap organization titled ORREZ. And we have some local friends of that organization who encouraged us to produce the information needed so they could create that handicap. What I didn't know with that handicap was they would also create a VPP. So I've taken that vessel performance profile data, and it's an Excel spreadsheet system that comes up with specific numbers based on their inputs. They took the shape of the hull, they went from the draft of the hull lines, sail area, and so they knew a lot about the boat that generally handicaps of the older variety don't have. Length, width, depth, sail area. That's not really telling you what the displacement of the boat is. So with the displacement of the boat and a variety of other factors included, this ORREZ presents a lot of VPP information. So I've all but hand put that in here with the polar system, so we now have that. And so it's going to be an experiment because there's some assumptions in that ORREZ that are based on modern boats that a traditional boat doesn't, like Pride doesn't do. Reaching, downwind. You get rid of the jib and you put up a big chute, whether it's a single luff chute or a double luff chute, and the space between the mainsail and that chute is really, really long. So you can sail deep. Well, we don't have any of that gear, and the sails we have are hanging on stays or hanging on masts. So what happens is we can't sail quite as deep. Because the biggest sail in the back starts to shadow up forward pretty early. Also, with the overlap of the headsails, we have 3 headsails. They have anywhere from 15 to 30% of overlap. So, and they hang on very, very horizontal stays. Our stays reach way out to that head rig, so they hang like curtains in really, really light air. And it takes a fairly decent breeze to get them to billow, and that's more and more important as you bear away. But you can't go quite as deep as these more separate sail plans for reaching in modern boats. So I don't think the VPP rather, represents our real capability of going downwind. Modern boats seem to be able to sail at 140 to 160 apparent wind, which means nearly 170 true wind. I don't think we can get down particularly if the sea is bouncing around. Yeah. So 120 to 130 apparent is pretty deep in a relative sea because of the shadow blanketing.
Yeah.
Now we do have the square sail, and we can carry the stunsail and the top gallant stuff, and that helps keep the boat powered up, but you're losing power because of the blanketing. But I think we can't sail quite so deep. So it'll be interesting to see how it all, in conversation in my detailed logs, which possibly make eyes roll up into their head. But
one final question here, and this is from Annapolis to Bermuda. How's the long-term weather look for the virtual race, and how much will you play the eddies?
Oh, well, the eddies of the Gulf Stream are critical.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a dominant feature of the decision as to how to go from outside of the mouth of the bay to near Bermuda. However, and going to the other question, it looks like it's going to be a beat to windward in relatively light air, moderate air. So, I mean, Chesapeake Bay winds from the south.
Yeah.
For pretty much all night tonight. And then sometime during Saturday, and the further south we get, or are by that time, we'll start to see a little bit of veering of the wind through the changing systems as they're coming across towards the southwest. Now, once we get out of the bay, southwest is a wonderful angle to have for heading for Bermuda. But it's also a change of a front. There's going to be rain, which means there's likely to be squalls, and there's going to be a change of a fairly quick shift of change of direction from southwest through west up to northwest, and that will mean jibing the ship maybe, or maybe we'll go further south along the coast of Virginia before we then jibe over to head with a northwest wind, which in part is forced because the further south we get, the less violent the system will be, I think, but also to deal with the eddy, to catch, because it's going to be a counterclockwise eddy that's the most dominant feature that I've noticed about 4 days ago. So we'll want to be in the southern hemisphere for that eddy.
Yeah.
And then eventually that wind for 4 or 5 days of outlook is going north, northeast, and eventually east. So we want to get the Bermuda's finish before the easterly, right?
Right. Ideally. That makes for an uncomfortable finish.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning for Coffee with Captain and our conversation about voyage planning. If you guys have any additional questions that relate to the subject, please drop them below in the comments. I just want to thank everybody for donating. That helps keep this Coffee with Captain going. Captain Miles, do you have any parting words?
As always, be diligent.